Welcome to Christ the Center, your weekly conversation of Reformed theology. We're now on episode number 587. It's an important number.
Wow.
My name is Camden Busey. I serve as pastor of Hope Orthodox Presbyterian Church in Grayslake, Illinois. And I'm back with another fun episode and another important guest. I'm down at Mid-America Reformed Seminary today. Got a couple meetings as the pastor of one of the current students. They have annual meetings for the ministerial apprenticeship program, so I'm here for that. But while I'm here, I'd love to have conversations with professors and other people on some important theological matters. And so I'd like to welcome to the program today Reverend Andrew Compton, who is an assistant professor of Old Testament studies here at Mid-America. He's been here for a little over a year. Isn't that correct, Andrew? Welcome.
It's coming up on 3 now.
3 years.
Because we moved in.
That's right.
We moved in May. So,
yeah, just time flies.
It does. It's going really fast.
We had you on the program before to speak about some important matters. Proverbs, I believe it was.
Yeah, yep.
And today we're going to be talking about another Old Testament topic, speaking specifically about some of the theological themes and hermeneutical issues revolving around Isaiah, specifically Isaiah 44:24 through 45:7.
Mm-hmm.
But that'll provide plenty of things to discuss with larger scope regarding the Old Testament. So we're doing a little bit of experiment. Last time I was down here, we certainly recorded with the same gear. Usually I bring 2 microphones. But today we're attempting to take the video on the road. So We've been doing video in the studio for now since the summertime. Yes, we're waving to the cameras. But this is my first experiment of doing video on the road, as it were. So bear with us if the framing is a little weird or whatnot. If people are watching and things are a little bit out of place or look a little strange, we're working at it. Audio's become old hat to us, or to me at least, but the video not so much. So we're working at it, but we're happy to be here, happy to discuss some important matters. Andrew, what's going on at Mid-America lately? I want to give you an opportunity to talk about the seminary. I serve as a board member. I'm happy to be one. But it's good times for Mid-America, isn't it?
Yeah, we're having a great time. We're just at that time of year where we have prospective students visiting. We have new faces showing up. The students are all getting ready to go off on summer assignments just in a couple of months, and you can see the sort of eagerness and uncertainty and all kinds of emotions that they're going through as they think about, well, where am I going to wind up? Where am I going? What's that church going to feel like? So, yeah, it's a fun time of the year.
Yeah.
Just,
It's interesting to be around the seminary for a while. You feel this way as a student. I felt maybe my 3rd year at Westminster, you start to get used to the ebb and flow and the typical rhythms and patterns. And I very much like that. I think it's a vague echo of what the Lord builds into the week with the Sabbath, where you have the 6 days of work and then 1 day of rest. But with the academic schedule, it seems a little bit more pronounced, where you have these pushes, to get a test or an assignment done, or for you, to administer an exam and then grade the exam, and then you have a bit of a rest. Then you come back at it, and then you back off, and you hit it hard, and then you back off. And so, come the spring, it's another one of those feelings here toward the end of March, where, especially if you've been in the same place, geographical space for a while, all of those patterns even start to merge with the weather and everything like that. And you start to realize, it's that time of year, and this is what we do that time of year. And so I feel for you as a Bruin and a Californian to be out and among us now.
I know it.
With these weird winters.
This was a hard winter. The other ones were fine, but all of a sudden this year I went, what did I do this for?
Yeah. It's a hard one.
No, I have no regrets.
I grew up in northern Illinois. I know we're just over the border in Indiana here, the same kind of weather. These last few years have been odd. But
this last 2 were so doable, especially my first year here. I mean, I was riding my bike on the roads and my bicycle in January. I mean, it was just no problem. Whereas, boy, this year we had those negative 20 or negative 50 wind chill days, and I thought, what is going on?
I know.
But
I brought the bike inside on the trainer, but even in my basement, it's still freezing cold.
Yeah.
Goodness.
It's been a good rhythm though, and it's interesting too, because now this is my 3rd year here, so I'm about to watch the group of guys that came in with me graduate. And
Wow.
that's really been amazing, watching their progress. I mean, just seeing these guys grow in 1 year, and then in the second year, and then all of a sudden seeing
Gone.
them, and and some of them are already, there's just nothing is official, but they're already visiting certain churches that, who knows, they may get a call there. It's mind-boggling just how quick time goes, but exciting to see too their growth. And they're going to be young to the ministry. That's what all of us were, but just seeing how equipped they are has really been humbling. It's more a testimony to their strong work ethic. I don't want to take too much credit for it, but we've tried to put together a curriculum and tried to have a focused instruction that gets them to this point. So we know that we've done due diligence too. So,
well, I very much appreciate that about the seminary, your concern and the direct involvement with local churches, not just saying so, but real explicit ways and official ways in which the seminary is actively involved in the local church, and it spans a whole gamut. I mean, I'm here today because the seminary requests that the pastor of a student be here for the student's evaluation, if you will. They'll speak to me about all the many great things about our student, about ways in which he could grow. I can speak very frankly about strengths and weaknesses, and then you, as a faculty, take the remarks of the local church, not just me as the pastor, but the whole session. And oftentimes I've had the case where you've changed, not official curriculum, but you've altered things in the syllabus, or you've spent extra time with a student to help him with various things. So it's a true bilateral communication between the seminary and the church, whilst the seminary knows that rightful spiritual authority and proper spiritual formation happens in the church, but you're a servant to the church, not just with lip service, but actively involved in it. But it also goes outside the classroom too, because my father's church out in Rockford has been searching for a pastor. And he emailed down here for some pulpit supply, thinking that, maybe we can get some students. And Tracy was so kind and just actively worked, and next thing you know, the whole faculty, it basically is signed up over the course of months to provide pulpit supply. And that includes professors who aren't even in the OPC, in that denomination. But that's the kind of thing that I've seen over 6 years, at least, being near Mid-America. That is par for the course. That's tremendous. That's a tremendous par level, I should say. And I would not expect that from seminaries or professors everywhere you go. But it really does warm my heart to see that that's a typical thing. And it shouldn't go without saying, but the way things are treated around here, that's just what you do.
It's a cool learning community. It really is cool. I mean, we've had, every school will have some type of field work, obviously, that, how do you call yourself a seminary without that? But I've just never seen this kind of intentionality with a field program, to actually have an apprenticeship program, built in, that sort of is the bread and butter of what we're doing here, and knowing we've got the ministerial apprenticeship program going on, just so affects how we think about lectures, how we think about curriculum, how we and then like you say, these meetings where the local pastor comes in, meets, discussion with faculty, and the nice thing is that whatever faculty advisor so there's just this great kind of team effort to build up this young man, or whatever their age is, but build up this man who's training for ministry, and how that enables us to even go out of there thinking about other kinds of curricular ways that'll changes maybe or improvements that would continue to help us to train men for ministry. And just throughout the whole MAP program, I mean, we just had our theological reflections in the last month, and I've been so amazed by that whole concept that, okay, so these guys go off, do their summer assignments, they have an interview in the fall where faculty members sit down with them, hear from them, how did your summer assignment go? Professor Vanderhart is just has this long built up procedure of how to ask questions, what kinds of questions
Yeah.
about it, how to guide them to reflect meaningfully on their
He's
summer
been doing it
assignment.
for decades, yeah.
And he's watched so many different things happen, and so he's such a great director of the ministerial apprenticeship program. But after that interview, there's an additional component where we do these theological reflections, and here too, the really neat thing is it's not just an issue in ministry. Okay, how do I deal with the fact that when I was doing this summer assignment, somebody complained about this topic or whatever, and the session did this, and was that right? What would have been? But he's saying, but what are theological and biblical principles operative in answering that question? So it's just continuing to bridge the biblical, the theological, and that sort of vocational, concrete, merging them together. So it was fun doing these theological reflections. So we had that about a month ago.
Wow.
It's been another cool year.
Yeah, and I think last time we talked, we spoke a little bit about how even the Old Testament courses are directly connected with the preaching courses. And I know that can happen. We do find in other seminary curricula. We think that's important, though, as you're learning the text and as you're exegeting, that you also are not just exegeting in a vacuum, but you're actually exegeting with a mind toward preaching and proclaiming these passages to God's people. Excuse me. And so, even as we're going to speak and open up Isaiah, it's certainly not without a view towards the edification of God's people. That's what we hope to do here at Reformed Forum as well by discussing these matters. We seek to assist the church. Our mission is directly obtained from Colossians 1:28. We seek to present every person mature in Christ, and we recognize it's a church that does that by the means of grace, but we do everything we possibly can to assist and facilitate that. So thank you for taking the time today to lead us and guide us in some of these notes. But I guess I'll just ask you as we turn our attention to some of these matters, what are some of the things that you have going through your mind as you're teaching young students about prophets like Isaiah, and some of the questions and particularly thorny matters that might arise in the classroom as you're trying to lead them and guide them in the way that they should go?
Yeah, obviously there's a whole range of topics to cover relative to the prophets. One thing we try to look at in our exegesis classes is keeping these big biblical theological categories firmly in place, as we're approaching the prophets, and also using all these sort of literary critical tools that we have and we can use to our advantage, careful attention to syntax, careful attention to grammar, but even attention to what we call discourse features, this whole discourse analysis, or other terms called text linguistics, and that the cool thing relative to what we were going to talk about concerning Cyrus is we see how some of these discourse analysis features, again, give us really good insight into this unit, this textual unit, and so these things start to merge in terms of thinking about the biblical theological categories, seeing how these are not just sort of a broad thing that's floating up there that now we're imposing on passages, but no, these things are connected. These things are directly related and
organic in a sense, as opposed to artificial.
Yeah,
right?
We're not making this up, and so, and then even how this particular question of Cyrus, the king of Persia, and Isaiah's mention of him just came up as we discussed how are prophecy and apocalyptic, how are they similar, and where do they differ? Where are the distinctions to be made? So that was another aspect that came up in thinking about prophecy and how we teach it here.
Could we maybe read the text?
Yeah, let's do that.
Maybe if you've got your Bible open already before you, if you could read it in English, please.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Because I see that you've got the MT open as well.
I figured we could look at some of that, of course. But yeah, no.
I'd be happy to hear that read. But
here we have, we'll start at verse 24. So Isaiah 44:24. of course, you're trying to figure out why do you choose to start in places.
And which
if you're looking
Isaiah
at
is this? The first, second?
Yeah, right. That's going to be relative to what we're talking about here. No, well, if you're looking at it, your ESV, they have a heading at verse 21. But I was struck that at 24, they have this really clear, again, here's sort of a discourse analysis feature, thus says the Lord. Here's this introductory formula, which gave a good start to this pericope. And it'll go, even though 45 verse 1, again, the ESV has added another subtitle. I think it goes very naturally through here into verse 7. And you could almost go beyond that, but here's where you kind of wrestle with trying to delineate a textual unit. This 7 seemed to be a good ending to this particular place before it pivots a little bit. But so that's why I'm choosing to read what I'll read. But here we go. Start at 24. Thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, who formed you from the womb. I am the Lord, who made all things, who alone stretched out the heavens, who spread out the earth by myself, who frustrates the signs of liars and makes fools of diviners, who turns wise men back and makes their knowledge foolish, who confirms the word of his servant and fulfills the counsel of his messengers, who says of Jerusalem, she shall be inhabited, and of the cities of Judah they shall be rebuilt, and I will raise up their ruins, who says to the deep, be dry, I will dry up your rivers, who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall fulfill all my purpose, saying of Jerusalem, she shall be built, and of the temple your foundation shall be laid. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him and to loose the belts of kings, to open the doors before him that gates may not be closed. I will go before you and level the exalted places. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness and the hoards in secret places, that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who call you by your name. For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel, my chosen, I call you by your name. I name you, though you do not know me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me there is no God. I equip you, though you do not know me, that people may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is none besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I form light and create darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I am the Lord who does all these things.
So, how then, we're going to explore at least the relationship between prophecy and apocalyptic.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a prophet here making a prophecy. We'll speak about the nature of that, but we find other Old Testament genres, for example, in Daniel, which is a different genre,
right.
Apocalyptic genre. What might we see as some similarities and some differences here between this passage and what we might find in Daniel 9, for example?
Sure. Well, in this whole question of apocalyptic literature has been taken up in recent years. Some have sought to really dissociate it from prophecy. Now, some of this comes because in the academy, people love to have sort of hermetically sealed off categories.
Oh, sure.
So you want to have an apocalyptic school that was somehow in conflict with a prophetic school. That's kind of a nice edgy, thing. And so there's some of those things get played out and overstated. But even though I would suggest that apocalyptic is closely related to prophecy, in some ways a very focused type of prophecy, it does have some unique features to it. It has a lot of echoes with the wisdom tradition, where sort of the prophetic idiom often focuses on very, it's almost sounds a bit weird to put it this way, but very historical kinds of events in Israel's history or in the history of the church. Apocalyptic likes to place the, maybe turn up the equalizer knobs on the cosmic scope. Again, not to bifurcate, as though prophets couldn't talk about cosmic ideas or have creational concerns, but we just seem to see that with more of a sustained accent in apocalyptic.
So, thinking about two different genre on those regards, I guess it's helpful then if I'm to try to take some lessons away from what you just said. It's important to distinguish the two, but we shouldn't have some sort of artificial divide where we have to consider them as completely different and separate things.
Yeah, like rival groups. You have this prophetic school that they're, then you have these apocalyptic prophets, and they're both each vying for, to be the right ones.
And I like that phrase. It's a very a phrase that my friend Lane Tipton likes to use a lot. Hermetically sealed, and so clearly these are both where we should acknowledge that these are both coming by inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So we have the same primary author in both of these texts, in both of these genres, and they're both serving the church in that regard, even though there could be some different textual differences at work. So speaking then of Isaiah specifically, if we have a predictive prophecy here that's prophesying something to come, what is it prophesying? And in the sense of what's the purpose of this? How are we to understand what Isaiah is getting at?
Yeah, and that
or I guess I should say, what have some people interpreted this passage as saying?
Sure. Well, yeah, and that's the thing. This question of Cyrus coming does point to a very concrete event. We think of in 539 BC, Cyrus issues the decree to rebuild the Temple of Jerusalem, to send the exiles back, to ensure that this temple gets rebuilt. Part of this was part of a broader, Achaemenid imperial policy where they, by rebuilding some of these centers, they were better positioned for taxation reasons, for draft reasons of soldiers. People have sometimes treated the Persians as these very enlightened, like North American Western types who were, very, very, they were sort of liberal arts types, and yet, well, they had some very good policies in that way, but they also were a standard ancient Near Eastern empire, and by allowing for local rule and local custom, which was very different from both the Assyrian and Babylonian model of, rip peoples out of their areas, make them unsettled, and then they'll be more submissive. Well, with them, they said, hey, let's settle them in. Let's let them propagate their local traditions and cultures. They're ultimately under the say of the king. I mean, he's gonna tell them what he wants from them, and they better do it, or they're gonna get their heads hung in trees just as quickly as the Assyrians did.
Wow.
But they did tend to have, I don't know, we could maybe even call it a gentler touch and a more localized kind of touch. So Cyrus, I mean, this was a big deal. Him ensuring the rebuilding of the temple. There's a text at the British Museum, the Cyrus Cylinder, that's gone on the road before. I was able to see it in Los Angeles a few years ago. But it sort of tells the same story that we read about in Ezra 1, but from more of a polytheistic perspective, where he did this to a lot of these civilizations, sent back their treasures, sent back their people, rebuild temples. And anyway, the reason all this is important is, so here is this figure, Cyrus, being named by Isaiah, and he is going to play this important role in the comfort of God's people that we find in this whole section of Isaiah. So he's going to play this very particular, this particular role. But the question that comes up then is, well, how would Isaiah have known of him?
Right, which brings into view, or at least discloses, an interpreter's presuppositions greatly. How you answer that question is going to reveal to the reader of the work or the commentary an awful lot about where that person is, where that interpreter is. How have other people interpreted this passage? Because clearly many are going to reject it's a predictive prophecy.
Right. And that's, I think, where it kind of comes down to it. There was, for the longest time, this idea that, well, prophets predict things because God has inspired them. There was this revelational paradigm. But even, and the amazing thing is, even prior to sort of the Enlightenment, there were people starting to say, well, there's characteristics in Isaiah 40 to the end that just seem to have been written in exile. so they couldn't have been written by Isaiah, son of Amos, as the earlier part of the book. Even Abraham ibn Ezra was a rabbi in the 12th century A.D. Who claimed that Isaiah 40 and following was from Babylon on the eve of the Persian conquest. So he and come the Enlightenment, come the real development of critical biblical scholarship, that led to really establishing the idea of chapters 1 to 39 are from the 8th century prophet Isaiah, son of Amos. 40 to 45 became labeled Second Isaiah or Deutero-Isaiah, and they were a sort of this was a 6th century exilic writer who was wrestling with some of Isaiah, his predecessors' predictions, and trying to make them relevant. He's trying to comfort these exiles. And then even 56 to 66, some have further delineated this as Third Isaiah. That's been a debated point. Some have, in fact, the critical guild goes back and forth. Right now, I think the biggest distinction is between First and Second Isaiah.
Really?
But and so Third Isaiah kind of comes into vogue and then goes away and then comes back. But the point being is that there's this impulse to say, this stuff does not seem relevant to the 8th century BC. All these predictions, all this comfort, all this talk of exile, all this talk of restoration, why would that be important? So maybe we should instead see this as originating at the time of the exile or even in the post-exilic period. And now we can make sense of the text better. You couple that with an anti-supernaturalism or an anti-revelational paradigm, and now a passage like this one we're looking at with Cyrus, this no longer is about predicting an individual. Now it's about looking back at this rise of Cyrus and saying, look how much he did for the people of Israel, for our community, whoever this post-exilic writer is. And he did this, so let's write him into the story and make it look like God had actually revealed his coming many years earlier. And that will help to show this central role that the Ecumenids are playing. Some scholars have even suggested that this is trying to show the Ecumenids as now the heirs to the Davidic promises. Well, that's, I think, kind of a push. I don't think we see that in Isaiah here.
So
but you at least see how
people
are trying to deal with this.
Right. So they're, in a sense, if it is written later. So these are people that would reject, for various reasons, that this is a predictive prophecy, that somebody wrote this after the fact and then rewrote the history. How far is this from, or is this another, like a form of etiology? I don't know. Is it? I mean, it's a similar thing though. You're finding something in that has happened later, and you are trying to make the history fit with whatever that is. Maybe with or without intent.
Exactly.
But that seems to be the purpose.
Trying to write it in so it doesn't look like an accident of history, but it makes it look like, oh no, God's still in control. So here's this group of this supposed Isaianic school trying to salvage their Isaianic corpus. But,
so, we've got some copies here. At least I just fell into a set of E.J. Young on in his commentaries on Isaiah. You also have here the Unity of Isaiah, a study in prophecy by O.T. Alice. These are two important figures on the study of Isaiah. How does Young, for example, then address some of these issues? Now, the scholarship might be a little bit dated, but at the same time, he's still presenting Orthodox Reformed doctrines that have not aged in the sense that they're still applicable today. What were the ways in which a figure like E.J. Young, for example, might address some of these critical challenges in the face of the mounting critical scholarship? Sure.
Yeah, Young and Alice before him really provided an incredible contribution at the time, when they were dealing with just a widespread adoption of multiple Isaiahs, or I should say a detaching of most of the book of Isaiah from the man, Isaiah, son of Amos. Really You're right. It is dated work. Now, Young's philology is especially strong, and I was struck even by when I studied with Marvin Sweeney, who is an Isaiah scholar. He engaged regular with E.J. Young's Nicot volumes.
Yeah. Well, he was a genius. Like, he was a
Yeah.
savant with languages.
Oh, I know. And that's there again, the philological
Right.
sensitivity is very much evident, such that, again, a Reformed Jewish scholar like Marvin Sweeney can benefit from aspects of it. Yeah, other things he's plenty critical of.
Sure.
That's, so it's not like, he's accepting everything that Young said, but it just goes to show Young's work on Isaiah is really a remarkable thing. But Young and Alice before him, I think, brought some real close reading. I mean, on the one hand, of course, they affirmed that prophecy can be predictive, and not only can be predictive, but is in fact predictive. And this would be one of these places where we see that. And what has been, and I guess in some ways, when we're looking at this passage in particular, in Isaiah 44 and 45, Young is very much dependent on Alice. He's not trying to do anything new. He thinks Alice has pretty much got the analysis right and is going with it. And I'm with him. I mean, I think it's not that's to Young's credit to say why reinvent the wheel. I mean, Dr. Alice showed us a way through this, and
let's take it.
Yeah, and the amazing thing is, it's not even I don't even see this as simply like, whew, we dodged that bullet. Here's a way through this. But no, this is the analysis. This is the emphasis of the passage. This is what the whole context is after. So this is exactly what we'd expect. We'd expect an individual to be named from the future who's going to be deliverer, because the whole, we're learning about, I am the Lord who does all these things. I am the Lord and there is no other. You all, you idols, you are non-gods.
Yeah.
This is exactly what we would expect at a crucial moment like this in the book of Isaiah.
Oh, yeah, clearly. I love all those passages in Isaiah too that talk about the ridiculousness of idolatry.
Mm-hmm.
You guys will chop a tree down, use some of it to cook your dinner, and the other part of it you bow down and worship.
Yeah, yep. It's just the humor is great.
The one true and living God is certainly not difficult for him to raise up a ruler who will accomplish his purposes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so much of an axe to grind. And what do you think it is driving people? I guess we can't judge hearts. We can't ascertain motives per se, from the scholarship. At least it's a very dangerous thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But there does seem to be, even in some conservative evangelicalism, a reticence to acknowledge a predictive nature to prophecy if it can be shown that it could have just been done according to naturalistic purposes.
Yeah, there is there is sort of an impulse that says, well, if I can explain this, in a simpler way, in a natural way,
like an Occam's razor.
I was just going to say Occam's razor, because that's really what's operative in that, and it's complicated. I mean, you do have some people who just say, I don't really believe in miracles. I don't really believe in revelation. I'll hold on to this resurrection thing because I kind of need it for my faith, but otherwise, everything else I'm a little squeamish about because I don't see them all around me. I just, see ordinary life going by. So obviously there's some people with that. It's interesting. One of these articles published in Jets by John Halsey Wood several years ago was evaluating O.T. Alice and his treatment of Isaiah. And actually trying to be fairly critical of Alice, and saying that Alice was being more of a knee-jerk, born out of the sort of modernist controversies of his day, fundamentalist modernist debates. But in the Wood article, he cites a letter that was once written to E.J. Young, and he says to Young, as I believe you know. This is by H.H. Rowley, another scholar at the time. As I believe you know, he says to E.J. Young, I still adhere to the critical school, though I am by no means tied to its results. However, I do not start with any anti-supernatural assumptions or any evolutionary assumptions, and I do not think that the fullest and most critical study of all the evidence available to us threatens in the slightest degree the foundations of the Christian faith. So here he's trying to claim to Young, look, I'm not presupposing anti-supernaturalism. I'm not against revelation. I'm just looking at all these other things. Now, I hear that, and yet I think, it's easy to say I don't start with these assumptions, and yet the very fact that certain kinds of data seem definitive or even operative in this person's thinking seems to show that they do hold these assumptions, even if it's inadvertently. Now, why do people hold these inadvertent assumptions? Hey, there's a lot of books, a lot of commentaries being written out of the sort of scholarly guild. There's a lot of great scholars doing great work, and there's really a desire to be a part of something that in a lot of places is doing really good stuff. Now, I'm not trying to sound like I'm uncritically saying everything that happens at the Society of Biblical Literature is therefore for us to embrace, and there we go. But you do have that push. You do have a lot of people wanting that kind of acceptance. And the best way to do it is to jump and march according to their marching orders.
Yeah. And to adopt the various presuppositions that they may have and everything pertaining to that.
And you would look at a passage like this where, in the scholarly guild, they want to know why a section of Isaiah like this, how it reflects the historical period of that post-exilic time, or maybe the late exile. They want to understand how Judean thinking is playing out at this point.
So there's some that don't see the efficacy of such a prophecy, or they don't see what good does it do to the people immediately if they're not even going to be alive by the time this prophecy is fulfilled.
Right. They would say that conservative scholars they're trying to read this as an 8th century text, and because of that, they don't have any meaningful way of integrating it. So that the conservative scholars saying, well, yeah, Isaiah back in the 8th century predicted this so that the book would be written down, and then in 150 plus years, then it'll actually matter to somebody. And so that's their assumption of a lot of conservative scholars. But I think there are conservative scholars and conservative preachers even who will start preaching Isaiah 40 and following and acting as though that's what happened, that essentially it was scribbled down in the 8th century and put in a safe deposit box until it was going to be worth something. Now, nobody would say that, but you can kind of see how it's treated that way. So I think we need to be asking...
I think some of my friends might treat their library, or even I treat my library like that once in a while. Right? It's like, you tell your wife or something.
I might need this one day.
I've got to buy this book. I've told the story before, but a friend of mine bought this book, and he didn't realize. Like, he came home and his wife says, "What's that?" He goes, "Well, I just bought this book," and she was so livid with him because he paid for it, and I think quite literally they had like 12 cents in the checking account after that check cleared. Right? And so they didn't become destitute or end up in a poorhouse. But years later, this is the kicker. His wife was like digging through his library or something, or they were moving to a new apartment or something. And he pulled that book out, the book that got them down to like 12 cents.
Oh, my.
And it was still in the plastic wrapper.
Oh, no. Oh.
She says, "Isn't that book?" Yeah. So we really needed that book at that moment, right? He's like, "Yeah. Well, who knows? Maybe we'll need our books in 150 years. Yeah. I don't know."
I don't know. That's funny. But you can see how, I mean, it is disappointing. It seems like when we as preachers or as exegetes just seem to lack imagination and lack literary sensitivity to deal with a text like Isaiah 44 and 45 coming from the late 8th century. I actually think that there's literary clues here in the passage we read. There's some contextual clues in that literary context in chapters 40 and following, and there's even a historical context we pick up from chapter 39 that I think help to make us look at this and say, in the late 8th century, they needed to hear that there was an individual coming in the distant future, because they had a lot going on, and this was going to build them up at the time and show them Yahweh's faithfulness and His plan, and how things were going to play out over and against the claims that these idols were sort of the way to go.
Yeah, that's tremendous. So even though it might feel awkward to us or to certain scholars or interpreters, God has His ways and His purposes. It doesn't even say that in chapter 55. My thoughts are higher than your thoughts. My ways are higher than your ways.
And and this ties in too, where I think we as those who have a high view of Scripture, as conservatives, as confessional Protestants, I mean, we rightly recognize that God is able to reveal His word however He sees fit. I think we can sometimes knee jerk a little too quick of saying, "Oh, I don't know why this is the case, but but it's there, and so God did it right."
Yeah, sure.
Well, of course, there's no question about that. But is that all the work you're going to do on this?
Right. That shouldn't preclude us from further study.
Yeah. Well, how is this not only right? Again, how does this not just work? But how is this really? How does this really help drive forward the main section of this book? I especially don't want our guys here to just be exegetes who can show how these texts aren't big problems. Oh, good. Here's why we don't need to stress over this text. Yeah. What kind of exegesis is that? I want them to show that, and then show, and not only that, here's why this is really contributing to what's going on here. I understand this context. I'm trying to grapple with this book, and I see the argument being made and how this fits so nicely into that, because then you can preach it.
Yeah. What I would really be interested to hear you explain and talk about this idea that you mentioned a little bit earlier regarding idolatry and what we really have is somewhat of the the real front end of this antithesis between God and then false gods. And what's interesting in Isaiah there is that constant battle where the Lord is asserting Himself. He doesn't need to, because He's true and He's the creator and sustainer of the universe. But he constantly speaks to the people and affirms His power and might and authority over and against all the false gods that they worship. Yeah. Even, as we mentioned, explaining how ridiculous it is for them to do the things that they do. Yeah. But what's interesting is you draw out...
cook food on it, and then worship it.
Exactly. But what you explain here, at least in Isaiah 41 in the notes, and also in 44, on how in these places, this showdown with the idols, this conflict between the living and true God and false gods, really, in some ways, is kind of centered around, or at least the arena of that battle tends to pivot or turn upon this idea of predictive prophecy.
Yeah.
So how then is that, kind of put front and center as I guess, why is that such a big issue then? I think we understand why it should be to some degree, but what lessons might we draw from prophecy in general, but specifically even from Isaiah, to recognize predictive prophecy and genre and proper doctrine of God all kind of blending into one here in these two chapters?
Oh yeah, I mean, what's amazing is that this showdown does center on this ability to know the future. And why does one know the future? Because they're the author of the future. And so how does this play out? Is God just another figure in this crazy world, and he's responding to the ebb and flow of nations and of disasters, or is he the author of history? And it's really the doctrine of God in terms of he is the creator and of His providence. He's the sustainer. This is really being brought out, I think, in these passages. The idols. The question is, okay, do you know the future? Let's see how that plays out. Well, you can't know it unless you are the one who controls it.
Yeah. We see that very thing also in the Deuteronomistic history. You think of figures like Elijah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the Baals are put to the test.
Yeah.
And so this turns out to be kind of like a prophetic test.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's no shortage of prophets.
Yeah.
But an awful lot of them are false prophets. And so the question is, how do we know which ones are true?
Yeah.
And you put them to the test by whether their words bear forth, right?
Mm-hmm. Whether what they said happens.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's what's so striking, right? We're looking, our target passage here is the end of 44, beginning of 45. But looking at how this polemic plays out, I mean, so in Isaiah 41, starting at verse 21, we get sort of this first salvo. Set forth your case, says the Lord. Bring your proofs, says the King of Jacob. So let's see, let's see what you got. Let them bring them, and then what are they going to do? And tell us what is to happen. Here is this future kind of verb. Tell us what is going to happen. Tell us the former things, what they are, that we may consider them, that we may know their outcome, or declare to us the things to come. It's interesting, the form of the Hebrew word bo, to come to things. And here's this coming things. And he goes on, tell us what is to come hereafter. Again, another word for to come, like the word bo. Why? In verse 23, that we may know that you are gods.
Yeah.
Right? Like in verse 26, who declared it from the beginning that we might know, and beforehand, from this lifnei, from beginning, who did this that we might say he is right? There was none who declared it, none who proclaimed, none who heard your words. And we have the same thing happening in Isaiah 44, starting at verse 7. Who is like me? Let him proclaim it. Let him declare and set it before me, since I appointed an ancient people. Let them declare what is to come. There's that verb ata again. And what will happen. The word bo, again, used there. Fear not, nor be afraid. Have I not told you from of old and declared it? And you are my witnesses. Is there a God besides me? There is no rock. I know not any.
Yeah.
Right, here's earlier in 44. I mean, now we're gonna 44 is going to unpack this folly of idolatry, bringing us then to the passage we're thinking about here,
right.
where
so
we
all of
suddenly
that,
have the
open
Creator
and public cosmic challenge of the triune God against anyone to present to him any other true God. And then immediately after that, in the deafening silence of all of his rivals, he speaks his predictive prophecy.
And even how the passage lays out, what's so interesting is what O.T. Alice noted about Isaiah 44, verse 24 through 28, is that it has somewhat of a poetic structure. I mean, here's this passage that's balanced so nicely. Again, a discourse analysis type of thing that really plugs the meaning in. So that starts off in 44 with a series of just present participles. If you're a Hebrew student, you know the kotel form. And so that what we have all of a sudden is these initial statements. I am the Lord who made all things, present participle, who stretched out the heavens alone by myself. So made, stretched, who spread out the earth by myself. So it starts off, well, when did these actions take place? These took place in the distant past, right? He's looking back to creation now. Well, then we see in verse 25, and again, you don't catch this as easily in the English, but there's like a pivot in the form of the poem, where now verse 25 picks up a different type of participle. Now it's a bunch of hifil participles. And we just see them. They start off the verse with a hifil participle, and each of these lines also includes the word and a separate clause. And so now what do we have there? So, who frustrates the signs of liars and makes fools of diviners. Now the second participle, who turns wise men back and makes their knowledge foolish. Again, the two parts. And then the third participle, who confirms the word of his servant and fulfills the counsel of his messengers. Well, now we're starting, and Alice said we are seeing things that are ongoing in the prophetic work and ongoing in the life of Israel. This is God's present work. But then we switch gears yet again And now we have, again, discourse markers, where starting at the end of verse 26, we have another participle with an article on it, haomer, the one who says. And now this haomer begins to drive this ending. And listen to what it says. Who says of Jerusalem, she shall be inhabited, and the cities of Judah, they shall be built, and I will raise up their ruins. So now look how this is even getting longer. Like if we started off really short and snappy with the ancient past, we added a little more length with the word and in each of the 3 lines of that second section of the present. We're going to the future now, talking about things that will happen. It will be rebuilt. Several ands just on that first line.
So that's interesting, because you would naturally expect, if you were going to just wing a prophecy, that you would give little detail, so that you might be more right.
But it's
here,
like,
in the sense, the weight is on the future
as
in terms
he moves
of detail.
to the future, he starts saying more and more and more.
Yeah.
I mean, who says in the second line, who says to the deep, be dry, I will dry up your rivers? Only a couple little lines there. The third one, who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall fulfill my purpose, saying of Jerusalem she shall be built, and of the temple your foundation shall be laid. I mean, it's worth noting there that whole verse, even though you heard the word saying of Jerusalem, that's a different verbal form. It's all stuck under that haomer of Cyrus, saying
that
to
participle.
Cyrus. Yeah, and this is the biggest. I mean, what's interesting, I can't, our hearers can't see this, but Alice did this nice little early version of like a center chart, where he's just showing this first section, the ancient past, fairly short. Here's this middle section,
right?
But boy, the third section, it just
spans
completely
the whole page spread.
Yeah, and it just shows this is climaxing in the distant future, pivoting against the ancient past. With this individual, Cyrus, as part of this. Look, he's just thrown down. Let's hear you predict the future, and he's saying, so here and I'll do it.
Yeah.
So you can't do it, but here's what it's going to look like, and that's what leads on to this whole thing in chapter 45. We don't have to go through all this, but we see again, this is this individual who's going to come, and here is God's answer. He's not just going to challenge the idols, but he's going to prove it too. He's going to do this thing.
Yeah, he walks a walk and talks a talk. Puts his money where his mouth is. Not to speak too plainly about our Lord, but clearly he's not only willing to speak, but actually to prove it.
Yeah,
demonstrate. And that's what he challenges them. Bring your proofs.
Yeah.
The
and it
atsuma.
Exactly. Well, and it all, in this, and maybe, I don't know if you're interested in going here, but it seems that next question then is, okay, but why this here? Okay, I get it, this general battle with the idols, but why this now? And why this is the answer? Why predictive prophecy as the answer? And why prophecy of a deliverer who's going to bring back people from exile in the late 8th century? And that's, I think there's again another contextual type of feature here that we need to look at. Here's another one of these things that the Critical Guild has typically said. Exile, anything that mentions exile had to have been written after the exile.
Of course.
Deuteronomy, these mentions of exile, well, these are post-exilic redactions to it. Now, most sort of scholars of the ancient Near East know that exile happens left and right all over the place in all the nations, so that for Deuteronomy to speak of exile as a threat just isn't that staggering. Of course, exile is going to be a threat because we've seen exile happen in a number of surrounding nations, and we anticipate it's going to continue to happen. It has a long history of use, so that there's really nothing too striking about the fact that Deuteronomy mentions exile as a type of punishment. Well, of course, that's a terrible punishment. That's the kind of thing that you would expect of a covenant breaker, is that they be exiled. You don't need this to have been written after the fact. Well, and I think that we have the same kind of thing happening here in Isaiah, where this whole section is being is fitting into a very real fear that's now been introduced in chapter 39. Because there, we hear the story of Hezekiah, king of Israel, or the king of Judah, who welcomes the Babylonian envoy in, shows him everything. This is somewhat of an effort to make an alliance with them. He's showing them all the wealth. Here's what we got.
Not too bright,
great king. Yeah, I mean, here's what we got. So if you be our sort of big protectorate guy, this is the army we'll bring out to help fight your wars as long as you protect us. Well, this was a big mistake. Here's Hezekiah relying not on Yahweh's strength, but now on the king of Babylon. And here's the indictment then. Isaiah comes, 39 verse 5. Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house, and that which your fathers have stored up till this day, shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord." But listen to this, verse 7. "And some of your own sons, who will come from you, whom you will father, shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." Well, look how redundant that is. Some of your sons, who will come from you, whom you will father. Now, sons can refer to distant ancestors, no question. But what about verse 7 would indicate something distant? I think nothing. I look at verse 7, and it's quite possible that Isaiah's audience is saying his own sons who come from him, who he will father. This could be any day. Look what he did. This shoe could drop any day now. What are we going to do? Who's going to protect us? Maybe we do need to start beefing up our Chemosh worship. Maybe we do need to beef up our Baal worship a bit to try to fend off. What are we going to do? This could happen. And I think that is why chapter 40, comfort my people, why 41, 42, 43, 44, and 45 makes such perfect sense here in the late 8th century, at the time of Isaiah's writing. Here's this historical context of great uncertainty, great fear. And yet now God is renewing his commitment to his covenant people, and showing the vehicle of how he's going to triumph over these idols.
Yeah.
Here's this predictive prophecy, and here's an individual who's going to come, and I'm calling him out by name because right now, you're right, you feel like the shoe could drop any minute here, but there's a future. There's a future for your ancestors. There's a future for this covenant people that you're a part of. I see this, and I think it's exciting to think of how we preach this very thing. But even as we think of this kind of apologetic issue of the defense of this Cyrus unit as being original to the text, I think it all comes together as being, again, not some kind of problem we need to quick solve and get out of the way because we're a little embarrassed by it. But just by reading through this, we see what a fitting thing to have a reference to a figure who's not going to come for another 150 years and more.
Yeah, that's tremendous. Well, I appreciate you walking us through this. I'd love to revisit and talk more about some Isaianic studies, Old Testament studies. We're just talking to a friend of ours this week in podcast time. It came out last week's episode. Will Wood, who is now assistant professor at RTS Atlanta.
Oh, okay.
Studied at Westminster. And so I told him after we were done recording, we need to connect you two because we got to have some Vossian sympathetic Old Testament scholars. There aren't that many of you.
Wonderful.
And so we need to form the phalanx. So to use any old 80s WWF metaphors, we're going to put together the Legion of Doom, the Powers of Pain, whatever you guys want to be, the mega powers.
Yeah, come up with some title. We'll make
exactly.
shirts.
Seeking proper fidelity to the Old Testament studies. So,
sure.
Andrew, thanks for joining us today. It was really fun.
This has been a lot of fun. Thanks again for having me, Camden. And it's really fun to be a part of your program. And, excited about what Reformed Forum is doing.
Well, I am too,
go from there.
And thankful for Mid-America. People can visit the seminary online at midamerica.edu. Of course, we're online at reformedforum.org. If you'd like to get in touch with anybody, you can always send us an email. mail@reformedforum.org, and we try to connect you. But we do want to thank everybody for listening. We hope you join us again next time on Christ the Center.